Rules Review Committee to order, please. We will start with item number 2 on the agenda, public comment. Anyone wishing to address the Rules Review Committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 3, and that's Pledge of Allegiance, followed by a moment of silence or reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the November 28th, 2023 and the January 10th, 2024 Rules Review Committee meeting minutes, and they were in your packet. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Robinson. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion on the minutes of the November 28th, 2023 and the January 10th, 2024 Rules Review Committee meeting minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion to approve the November 28th, 2023 and the January 10th, 2024 Rules Review Committee meeting minutes signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to topics for discussion and possible action. We will start out with item number 5A, review all red line rule provisions or revisions. And Tasha did send out late yesterday afternoon a new copy of the revised latest edition. I think it's the 18th edition from the Corp Council of the new revised rules, and hopefully you had a chance to update your packet and make sure that you have the new updated rules as proposed, at least at this point. So we can, if I can get my computer to stop. We will start with anything on page 1 of the rules. The only thing in meeting attendance, as discussed earlier by this committee, the board chair shall have the authority. The change is to authorize a permit of attendance by approval of audio-visual at the voting meeting for only the following circumstances: inclement weather, other emergency or unforeseen circumstances, anticipated lack of a quorum. Any further? Supervisor Robinson.
It's more of an editorial, but under 201 Rule 1, we talk about telephonic participation of members, and we talk about audio visual throughout the rest of the rules. So should we editorially change that and make that consistent? Telephonic was the old language.
We certainly can. You're right. Telephonic was the old, I will call it the pre-Purner language, and audiovisual is the post-Purner language. So I certainly can make a note of that.
Okay, any other changes on page 1? Supervisor Robinson.
I'm going to be nitpicky, but I think that's what you asked. Under that same section under D1, we talk about educational meetings for the board being the third Thursday of each month, and unless otherwise ordered. And then we do not do that in November with the budget, and we do not do that in December where we don't have a meeting. And do we want to just state that up here? Or I think we catch it later, but for consistency.
Supervisor Longenham, please.
I'm just confirming we're on page 1, but wouldn't, unless otherwise ordered, catch all of that when there's situations call for the meeting not Thursday?
Look to Corp Council for the answer.
That's how we've been operating, so I would say yes.
Okay. Any other on page 1? Okay, moving on to page 2. Anything on page 2? We did go into a little more detail under Rule 3, the preservation of the order. Supervisor Robinson.
Under B5, no later than the second scheduled meeting of the committee on the date which is received. Are we putting 45 days? Is that where we're looking at the debate? Is that an item later in the agenda?
That's an item later on the agenda, but we can talk about it now, obviously. So one was to delete, obviously, to delete the 60-day notice, and then the other, well, also deleted the 60 in part 3, and went to the second meeting. But I think Supervisor Baker's request is to insert there no later than 45 days after the receipt of the request. Supervisor Baker?
I've requested to have a discussion around that to see if that's acceptable.
Right. Discussion, thoughts? Supervisor Longenau, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are all of our committee meetings considered to be business meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
So thoughts on the potential of changing it to no later than 45 days? Supervisor Robinson?
I think that provides the clarity and the certainty. You would have to put it in both 3 and 5, sections 3 and 5, B3 and 5.
Yep. Supervisor Longenau?
I would also just add, if we were to do the 45, we'd have to have some language saying excluding the first date of notification and including the last date and the computation of time. Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
I think we might have that elsewhere. I'm just going to check if in the interpretation of our ordinances overall. I'll check real quick.
Other discussion on the 45 days? Thoughts?
Chair Gibbs,
Go ahead, Supervisor McEwen.
thank you. Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Robinson with adding the 45 days. Gives some clarity to that. I agree.
Okay. Other discussion? Okay, we'll add the 45 days into section 3 and section 5? Yep, section 3 and section 5. Supervisor Baker?
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. I have a comment on B5. Prior to this term, I believe that there was a method by which a request of 2 people could get to the full board without the approval of the executive committee. I believe that was a change, and I would like to see that go back to something similar to what we had before.
Okay. And I know that just to refresh those that were on the board prior to, the reason for the creation of that two supervisors could bring anything to the board that effectively was defeated at multiple committees was a change that, so that at least it went through the executive committee. And so if it got defeated at a standing committee, and the prior rule said that any two supervisors could bring anything to the board floor. And so the rule change during this session was to say, no, that wasn't going to happen, even if it was defeated at committee. Two supervisors couldn't bring something directly to the county board floor for discussion. It had to go through. Now, the current rule defers that if two supervisors bring something after being defeated at a committee, it has to go to the executive committee. And if the executive committee feels it appropriate, then it can go to the full board. But it still must get approval from a committee to go to the full board. So Supervisor Baker's suggestion is that we go back to allowing two supervisors direct access to the full board's agenda. I caution people on what that potentially allows is a committee to or potentially multiple committees to defeat, or I should say, not advance an item, and then two committee members bringing it to the full board for discussion. That, to me, when we stand behind where the committees do the bulk of the work and the bulk of the research, and they become the programmatic experts in the area of county business, whatever that committee is. And now we're allowing two supervisors to bring something to the full board. I really caution on we had that challenge, we had that problem, that committee after committee, it was being brought back. And so I just caution us revisiting what we did when we had that prior. Supervisor Baker.
Thank you. I'm aware of the situation that you're talking about, and I do agree that there was some difficulties with that before. So I'm not necessarily suggesting we go entirely back to that. I don't have a recommendation. I just have some concern with the executive committee being the gatekeeper, and not having a way to get it to the full board. I guess I would, depending on how other proposals revolving around executive committee turn out, I'm not necessarily sure I would be quite as concerned. So I'll just table that. I just wanted to put it on record that I had some concerns about that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I totally understand, again, but the issue has been gone to a standing committee. The standing committee has taken the issue up. The individual has been invited to that committee to provide the input, and then the committee has made its determination. The appeal process goes to the executive committee currently. And again, the executive committee is the board leadership. So anyway, all right, moving on.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Longenhahn, please.
Thank you. I would, given the discussion that we've had about placing items on committee agendas and the county board agendas for that matter, I think it would be worthwhile when we have our reorg meeting in April to have as part of the education piece how items get considered and the methods that county board supervisors have to get them a part of the, get them part of the agenda.
Sure.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Any further discussion on page 2? We'll move on to page 3. Oops. Supervisor Robinson.
Again, nitpicky, but on the last, under E3, we state supervisor in the queue, but we don't define what the queue is. Is that having a recorded request to speak? Or is queue defined in Blackstone's or something else?
Q is not defined in Robert's rules. The way I wrote it was in the queue to speak, which I thought that phrase was self-defining. But if we think more definition or clarity is required, I certainly would not have an issue with that.
Supervisor Langenau?
Oh, it's interesting because I don't know if it's necessarily nitpicky, but it would be interesting if the voting software were to go down, and the chair would almost, or whoever's clerking the meeting would almost have to have a handwritten record of whoever had raised their hand in order to speak. I think it's an interesting point.
Thoughts? Again, we could clarify that, in there that it's that's request to speak under the software or written note by the clerk that raised hands prior to the request for question being called. Supervisor Langenau?
Last thing, somebody's iPad could be out of juice, right? Well, then there has to be a record of them. Yeah, so thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
I guess in my mind, in the queue to speak was general enough to include an electronic queue, a queue created by people raising their hands. However, I mean, I'm certainly open to other people reading this besides myself and interpreting it differently. I don't want that to happen. So if we said any supervisor who has requested to speak on the pending motion prior to the question being called, I mean, then the request can be in any form.
All right. Everybody in agreement with that? Okay. Moving on. Page 4. Supervisor Baker?
So I don't necessarily have a problem with 5B, but I don't remember us discussing that or that being a topic before. Has that been discussed, or how did that get added?
That's a good question. I don't remember that discussion either.
And if we do leave that in there, I would propose to change that from 30 minutes to 20 minutes.
Supervisor Langenau, please.
I greatly appreciate that previous comment because I was going to say I think 30 minutes is excessive. So I could definitely support 20 minutes. I also don't recall that being amongst our discussions, but I don't think it's a bad rule. So I would actually support this. So thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on item 5B? Changing that to not exceed 20 minutes. Okay. Moving on to the page 5 of 58. I don't believe that there's any changes, so I don't believe there should be unless there was any discussion on item 5, page 5. Page 6, we just go into clarification on public comment. Any discussion on that page 6? Clearly, we distinguish between public hearings and just public comment. Moving on to page 7. Page 8, no changes. Page 9. Yep, Clerk Trueblood, please.
I would like maybe some, I don't know, language to clear up a little bit as far as E4, as far as when things can be added to the packet that are presented after the deadline. Because I have been amending almost every single meeting packet, every county board, every committee. Is there a way we can firm that up a little bit so that items received after are only added in an emergency situation? I don't know the wording, but it is not an easy, quick couple of clicks to add things to packets. It's a process. So if we can get that firmed up to save some time, I would appreciate that.
I think the other challenge that amending all of the packets a lot of times do is creates opportunities for supervisors to have the wrong packet at the wrong time. Again, if they don't update their queue or their reference, it ends up they have the wrong packet, wrong information. They make statements that the information's not in my packet. Well, you don't have the latest updated packet. And so I don't disagree with needing some clarity, but I do think that there is always those unforeseen circumstances where information needs to be added to a packet after the fact. But I think out of respect for your office and the work that it involves, I think we need to firm that up so that it's not being updated just because of somebody didn't have the time to get it to you in time. In other words, if there's rationale for it being late, I understand that, but I don't know how to write that in a rule. Yeah, Administrator Leonard, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess this gets to the threshold question of how are you utilizing your packet? But I was conferring with Corp Counsel. I certainly appreciate the challenge the clerk's office has. I wonder, I know there are some occasions where Kim's staff, there's a presentation we have slide presentations that are going to be made, and those things are coming in. And I'm not making an excuse, but they come in late. People are trying to get information for the board to aid in or the committees to aid in decision making. Would it nevertheless be helpful to add that information to the packet after the meeting, or is that, I see Kim shaking her head.
My understanding is that once the meeting is held, you don't amend the packet. Is that?
Kind of goes to what are you using the packet for? Is the packet to provide information to be used at the meeting, or is the packet everything that was considered at the meeting and a record of that for the future? That's kind of goes to that threshold question.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
My concern about limiting it is that we've really, through our minutes, really deferred to the packet as a source of substance. While we're recording most of our meetings, we're not recording all of them. But even in the recording, in the context of recording it, we're not capturing necessarily the handouts. I think what we should do is try to educate people on the need to get the packets done earlier and try that. But I'm leery of putting an arbitrary deadline because invariably, I'll take the broadband task force. We are always getting the report from the internet service providers right before the meetings. And in the case of the broadband task force, there, granted, it's not something the clerk does, but Tasha does. Many members are participating remotely, and the only way to get information to them is by updating the packet. So it's that balancing act. What's the purpose of the packet? How are we recording information that's shared at the meetings? If we're deferring to the WCA approach to minutes, packets become more important.
Administrator Lennon, please.
I had a second side conversation, this time with the clerk. So your current rule reads that all packets for essentially for the full week of meetings should be in no later than the noon on the Friday preceding the meeting date. And this is just a suggestion, I think, to kind of try to have something that's a bit more workable. Because in my experience, that's a lot to get ready for. So invariably, the meetings that are held the following Thursday, those packets aren't ready. But perhaps if we had no later than 48 hours, it gives a little bit more. So Kim's office doesn't have kind of the batching issue of trying to get a whole week of things done right away. I mean, agendas we post by that Friday, but it's just a thought to throw out for your consideration because I certainly can see both sides.
Clerk Trueblood?
So then are you suggesting that packets will completely be posted 48 hours, or we post what we have on the Friday before? I mean, my preference is to post it once. I know that's not always realistic. I get that. So if we're going to go 48 hours, then we don't post a packet on Friday afternoon. We post it on Tuesday afternoon for the Thursday meeting. Is that what you're suggesting?
You've pointed out that my suggestion was just for
Flawed.
discussion. Because my sense is that supervisors certainly they appreciate the weekend to prepare before a Tuesday meeting. So thank you, Clerk Trueblood, for pointing out the flaws in the suggestion.
I like your suggestion. I just don't know that everybody else does.
Other discussion? Supervisor Longenau, please.
I would support something like this. In fact, I was probably the most recent violator of this rule because I noticed that the draft ERC minutes weren't a part of last Thursday's meeting, and I think I called Lori the day of and asked her to add them. So, I would support doing something about this to give some more clarity. I think that's something we need to chew on a little bit more. And that leads me to my last point. Are we having an additional meeting after this one, or is this our last meeting?
This was tentatively going to be the last meeting.
Thank you.
And I truly do appreciate the clerk's position, but I really, I struggle with when the emergency comes up because you just received the information from the state, or you just received the information from the Department of Treasury, or from NACO. That's pertinent to the discussion on the item. I don't know how, if we put something in writing that says that, that's an absolute, that, we're not amending the packet after 48 hours, but it can still be disseminated during the meeting. Is that, yeah.
My only ask is that I not have to amend every single packet the day before the meeting, as has been happening lately.
Supervisor Hart, please.
Thank you. I think in all of this too, there has to be a level of responsibility from departments and from other entities wanting to submit things. They have to understand that there is a very strong possibility that if they don't submit anything or if they don't submit things by that deadline, there's a lot of supervisors that are just not going to read it before the meeting, because I think a lot of supervisors read that over the weekend and then they don't look at it anytime after that unless there's an email that goes out that says that a packet's been updated. And even that's relying on a supervisor on, and I'm looking at this, from a weekend after basis of getting that email on a Monday and then finding the time between Monday and Tuesday in order to read that additional material. So I think in all of this, there has to be some sort of understanding there, and maybe some education that comes with that if you get your packet information late, there's a strong possibility that supervisors won't be able to consider it in time.
Supervisor Longenheim, please.
Yeah, I think Supervisor Hart makes some good points. The thing I was going to add is that if a department, if they don't get their materials in as part of that packet, and let's say we did go with that 48-hour rule as a hypothetical, well, then they're going to send out an email. It's probably going to be an attachment, and they're going to expect the supervisors to look at that attachment prior to going to the meeting. Similar to how if you got something the day of, communication from the state, from another organization, what have you, well, if it's the day of, they probably aren't going to call the clerk and say, I want this added. They're probably just going to say, hey, we got to print off 15 copies and have them ready for the committee meeting, right? Like, there's practical remedies to that. The timing gets really weird if you look at that Friday to Thursday part, because I could support the 48 hours and then just have a cutoff. But if you're looking at a lot of information, well, then it makes sense to have it out that Friday before, so then they have that weekend to take a look at it. The only other solution I have, and I'm Lutheran, so this hurts me a little bit, but I mean, you could just require them to say 5 Hail Marys if they get in the, something in the packet late or something. I don't know. We haven't really looked. I know, but we haven't looked at anything punitive in our rules, so maybe that's the first thing we could do. So.
Other discussion? Go ahead.
I don't know that this requires a change of your rules, but I'm making some notes right now. Certainly on the department side, I think Supervisor Hart makes some very good points, and I'm adding it to our next department head agenda to, again, reinforce this. We've done it before, but I can certainly do a better job of riding herd on that. And then I also think during the education meeting of the full board, and it gets back to that rule that was discussed before about submitting items for the agenda. Sometimes it, to Kim's point, it's not just amending the packet to add items, it's amending the agenda to add an item and to add the packet items. So I think there's certainly some opportunities for, quite simply, just improved diligence on the staff and the agenda setting side.
Supervisor Robinson?
Toward that end, I think it would be helpful if we could ask the departments to get it in the Wednesday before, because we're setting the agenda. And we just had for HR Finance 2 claims come in right at the 11th hour. And so we're looking at scheduling things. So if you could encourage them to be by Wednesday the week before to get things in. And I know that's not always realistic, but there are many times where there are things in and they just, there's a meeting next week, I should get this in. They should be thinking more proactively about getting things into the queue for the committee agendas.
All right. I think we're just, Supervisor Hart, please. Sorry.
Thank you. I think I have one question of clarification. So according to these rules, that means that nothing considered, in order to get it into the county board full packet, it has to have been considered by the standing committee first. So this eliminates the possibility of anything being added to the county board packet at the last minute, correct?
Unless it's a presentation that's being presented to the full board. So a PowerPoint or something that the presentation has not been to a committee, it's going to be only to the full board. So go ahead, Corp Counsel.
Looking at that subsection 2, county board meeting informational packets, it outlines what the purpose of the packet is for the county board. The first kind of sub-purpose is to provide the board with materials relied on by standing committees and other subordinate bodies. The second part is to provide members with pertinent information relevant to an item on the agenda as determined in the discretion of the chair. So there is some discretion to have items added after that weren't considered at the committee if they're relevant to an item as determined by the discretion of the chair. That was kind of, I think, a compromise language because of the discussion that we've had at this committee about, well, there could be something that comes up after the committee has considered the item that's relevant to what the board is going to do or not do.
Further discussion? Go ahead, please.
When information that should have been in the packet isn't available before the meeting and gets often emailed to the supervisors involved, what then happens to that information? Does it get added to the packet after the meeting? Because so what happens then? So then basically just the supervisors have that information that was made available oftentimes.
We never add to the packet after a meeting because that doesn't provide notice to the public.
But there are times during committee meetings that information wasn't available to be put in the packet that's relevant to the meeting that gets emailed to the supervisors involved. And so I guess how is that information then publicly? Is there a way to do, additional like a post information? Because I've seen that in meetings and I'm like, well, what did that say? And what is that about? And, so how does that information get, I guess, put out? I mean, I shouldn't have to email the supervisor directly to have them forward it to me. Like it should be posted in a post pack or something like that. Because there are certain committees that it seems like pertinent information doesn't come through until either right before the meeting or the day of the meeting. Not all, but some.
Administrator Leonard,
It's a
please.
good, I think that goes back to the point that we're discussing before. I think that's a very good observation. Right now, as Kim alluded to, there's not a process where those things are posted on our website in any form or fashion. They are emailed and, of course, are maintained through our public records retention process. But, we don't have that. On occasion, those items then, if they go to the full board for consideration, they're included in the full board packet, which I think mitigates some of the notice concern. But I think your point is well taken that there's not. And I can reach out to my colleagues just to see if their approach is different. I think Kim has laid out our historical approach very well, which is we don't add items to the packet once the meeting is done. I have a Monday morning call with a significant number of administrators every week, so that can be one of the questions I pose to them.
I think your point's well taken. I think the other thing, though, that's happens quite often is information is handed out at a meeting, at the full board meeting, and disseminated to all the supervisors at their desk, their place. And that's not added to the packet also, or information that is obtained that way. So I think we'll look into what, obviously it's still given officially to the clerk and that's maintained as part of a records retention requirement, but it's not posted anywhere for the public general viewing. Okay. Moving on to page 10. Oh, Corp Counsel, please.
I just wanted to give some clarity on, starting on page 10 under subsection B. This was kind of streamlining. Rule 12 is about committees. It was kind of all over the place, the different pieces. So, for instance, 12B, quorum, is the same quorum rule. It hasn't changed. It's just under the committee's rule to make it clear that it applies to committees. Public comment before committees, again, that used to be in a different section. I moved it under committees so it's clear what the public comment rule for committees is. So really this is like a reorganization so that it looks and reads easier, at least in my eyes. But if you disagree, I would happily take that criticism as well.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you. This is actually on the next page, but still in the same section. So D, recognition of non-members. I don't know if that was in there before. I don't believe we discussed that. That was in the.
So that was in the rules in a different spot. I copied it and pasted it here so that it was clear it applies to both the full board and committees. So it's the same language, just copied and pasted.
Thank you. So I would like to see that written in such a manner that a non-member, a member of the board, but not a member of the committee, or that would have the right to speak on items on the agenda, not that they have to ask permission. That I think that a board member should be able to speak. I have not had any issue with this. I mean, in practice, I've always been allowed to speak, so I'm not complaining about anything specific. I just don't think that, I just don't agree with the way that's written, basically, that a single member of a committee can object and then someone can't speak to an item.
And
No, they're talking about non-committee members is what we're talking about there. So a citizen member has to get authority from the committee to be approved to speak. So outside of public comment, we get into a debate on an item, and unless there's objection by the committee, an individual outside of the committee is allowed to speak. That's what we're talking about here, not a committee member. Any committee member has a right to speak all the time. I defer to Corp Counsel.
I agree that that was the intent. I also agree that I don't know that it reads exactly that way. I think it could be clarified. Any person not a member of the county board, so that it's clear that this is not impacting or addressing board members' right to speak at committees, because I think that's dealt with separately. But I don't think it's clear. So I think that change would make sense.
Supervisor Longenhead?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very confused with this rule. So, first of all, I agree. The intent behind it, the way I read it, is if you aren't a member of the committee itself or a subordinate body, and the way I read that is a subordinate body of the county board, not a subordinate body of said committee, correct? Okay, so that would include all of the board's committees, which all of our members of the board are members of. So desirous of addressing the committee or body on any subject outside of public comment shall first obtain permission. So any subject outside of public comment. So that would obviously include anything not brought up during public comment, which theoretically would be something on the agenda that they did not address there, correct? So is the intent behind this to be something like somebody spoke under public comment, they addressed item A on the agenda. Committee takes up item A, they go to item B. That person raises their hand in the crowd. They want to address that issue. Is this allowing the chair basically to say, hey, they requested permission to speak on B prior, they can speak on this now?
This is more, let's say we have an agenda item related to something about social services, and we want to hear from the social services director. She's not part of the committee, but if no one objects, she can provide information germane to that agenda item. Or if there's a member of the public who has information related to a specific item on the agenda, if the board or committee allows them to speak, they can, but if there's an objection and a majority vote of the committee doesn't, then they can't. It's the same rule that's always been in place.
Yeah, I just don't know what you just described there. I don't read here. That's, and like I said, it could be like every meeting here. It's too early for me, and I don't have enough caffeine. I can't untangle that web, so to speak. So maybe a little bit more clarity, like others have said previously. I was just trying to understand what the intent behind this was. So thank you.
Yeah.
Supervisor Baker, please.
I may be rehashing something we've already discussed, but in response to Supervisor Langhan's session, it does say a member of the committee or subordinate body. So I don't think it's saying that, the way it reads, it's not saying a member of any committee or subordinate body. It's talking about the specific committee or subordinate body that's meeting. So I don't think that the way it's written, I don't think it allows a county board member to speak. So I mean, we've already agreed to change that, so that's good.
Any other discussion? Okay, we'll move on to page 12. Page 13. Page 14. Supervisor Robinson, please.
My concern is the note under C. Note, in most cases, Wisconsin Open Meetings Law requires 24-hour notice. Isn't in all cases?
Urgency. No.
If there's an emergency,
It's 2 hours.
It's 2 hours.
Supervisor Langenau?
And the chair being out on vacation isn't considered an emergency. So,
Or in Florida.
yeah, we're in Florida. Yeah, right.
Page 15. I don't believe there's any changes to 15. Page 16. No changes. 17. No changes. Oh,
You might notice some red line
Italic.
italicizing because I like the format to be the same, so I tried to catch where things weren't italicized, but they were in other places just to make it consistent. So
Consistent.
that's what those red lines are.
I guess I failed to mention formatting changes. Moving on to page 18. No changes other than italics. 19. Supervisor Langenau.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question about, well, sub E and then 3. The initial resolution developed and proposed to the county board by the HR Finance and Property Committee. I've always thought that went through exec first. Or am I misremembering? Because I know it went through exec this year.
Never remember.
I just took the same language that was already existing, which said HR Finance, so that
I don't know if HR Finance took it up this year.
We
They,
did. We
We,
did.
we
I
took
think
it
I
up, but
went
I
through
think,
both.
but I think you're correct. I think exec made the recommendations,
We found the money.
and then HR Finance.
well, I guess if it says initial resolution developed and proposed to the county board is by HR Finance, I guess that's fine if it goes to exec, but if we want it to go through exec as a requirement, then I think 3 needs to be changed.
Yeah. Thoughts with that?
And just to be clear, the rules as they're currently written don't require it to go to exec. It just did this year. But if you wanted that to be a rule, that could be written.
Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
I mean, I really don't see that as part of the exec's body of work. That's why I was kind of surprised that it ended up there this year. I'm fine if it just goes to HR Finance because they're the responsible for developing the budget. They're going to review the numbers and then it would just go up to the board. I don't really think exec needs to be in the middle of all that.
The only thought behind bringing it to exec was that the exec committee had a better understanding of, because the HR Finance Committee had to find the money. HR Finance Committee wouldn't necessarily, all the members on the committee wouldn't necessarily understand the amount of workload that the chairs and the vice chairs were required. And so in setting their stipend that was in addition, I felt that getting the executive committee's feedback there was critical. Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be critical of that process. I would just add HR Finance, they have at least one always have at least one standing committee chair there. And I think HR Finance, with that chair would hopefully be someone who's got a couple terms under their belt. They've been to exec committee meetings. They've seen the processes the board goes through. They should be familiar with the other members' body of work. Not expert, but at least a little bit familiar. I don't know. I don't really think that exec needs to be added. But I think then we should clarify what the process is if we want to go from HR Finance to exec or if we want to stick with what the rule currently has. So
Thoughts?
I'm open to other discussion, of course.
Other thoughts? Okay, we'll leave it as it is. Okay, moving on. Page 20. Formatting change. Page 21. Formatting change. 22. Corp
So-
Council.
Starting on page 22 in sub B, annual performance appraisal, I didn't remove anything. I just changed the formatting so that it read easier instead of one giant paragraph, because I've been reading that for the last 3 years and it is difficult to digest. So I thought breaking it up was easier to read, but again, they're your rules, not mine. So if you disagree, I'd be happy to change it.
Thoughts, any discussion on page 22? Carried on to 23. We're on 22 and 23, Supervisor Robinson. Moving on. '24, nothing changed other than format. 25, again, nothing changed other than format. '26, format change. 27.
On page 27, you'll see subsection 5 removed. This wasn't discussed, but I wanted it to be discussed because I've read subsection 5 every time we've reviewed the rules, and I don't understand what it means. So I don't, because I don't understand what it means or what it's asking for, I guess I don't know its purpose. What it reads is, and this is under section 2.02 fiscal impact bills, claims, and appropriation, subsection 5, it shall be in order for any member to call for the reading of any accounts by items, and on request, a separate vote shall be had on the allowance of any account or item unless the board shall be under operation of the previous question. I mean, I've read that a few times. I'm not sure what that means.
Where are you reading
That's the part that was deleted.
it? Oh,
In the margin.
oh, gotcha.
I think at the last rules review discussion that was had, this was mentioned that it didn't make sense, but it just stayed in there. So I flagged it because, again, I have no idea what it means. If someone asked me in a meeting what it meant, I wouldn't be able to tell them.
Supervisor Robinson?
Could this be a carryover from the historic tradition of having the county board approve all bills that have already been paid and separating those out?
That's very possible.
Because I'm
definitely
thinking back in the 70s, we did that.
it's definitely a carryover from something.
I think I'm fine with it being deleted because as it makes literally no.
And I think the function of that accounting is now delegated to HR Finance.
Correct.
So it doesn't change anything other than removing something that makes no logical sense.
Okay, any other discussion on page 27? 28, no changes. 29, no changes. Get to page 30. Supervisor Robinson?
A question, we talked last time about the budget process and just expanding the scope of the committees. And we talked about having a resolution on an annual basis, sort of spelling that out. Did we want to amend, last time we went through the 5-year spending, the priorities and the fees. Do we want to insert those in each of the standing committees, or do you want to just do that as part of that resolution that comes to the board in the spring of each year?
And although I wasn't here at your last meeting, I did talk with my deputy, Dan. We talked through that piece, and I understood that it was one of those two options. So if you go down to page 35, I added under HR Finance another duty by June 1st of each year proposed to the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, a resolution relative to the proposed timeline for the yearly budget process to be followed for that year's budget discussions, but that doesn't put the separate pieces for each standing committee. But if you wanted to do that, I would be happy to add that.
But
Supervisor Robinson?
I think that we would either need to amend that language in 18, including the role of the appropriate standing, role and timelines for participation of the various standing committees. I would be fine with that, or we can build it into each of the standing committees' rules. So either way, but I think for transparency, I think it would be important to capture it somewhere.
Okay, consensus? Okay, moving on. We're on page 30, moving to 31. No changes on 31. No, we get to 32. Talked about that change. Moving on to page 33, no changes. 34, no changes. 35, no changes. 36. We just talked about that, and we're going to provide the clarity that each of the committees will also do the review. Moving on, 37, no changes. 38, no changes. 39, no changes. 40, no changes. 41, no changes. 42, no changes. 43, no changes. 44, no changes. 45, no changes. 46, 47, get to 48.
I can touch
Go ahead.
base on this. So this is removing the regional morgue task force because of the original sunset of the task force, I believe, was already met, and then the board took action to approve the funding. So if you wanted to continue to have that regional morgue task force meet during the pendency of construction, I just think we would need to change the sunset date. But if you don't think they need to meet anymore, then we can remove it.
Thoughts by the committee? Supervisor Robinson?
I would defer to the administrator, and is there a function if we're into that fundraising and building for the task force?
And your chair of the task force is on the meeting as well, so I'd largely defer to him. But, you know, from staff perspective, I think if there is a role, it is in that fundraising guidance area that you alluded to. I think operationally we have, we're going through the process of putting together the materials for releasing the bid for construction. I think your other standing committees, particularly HR Finance, has some areas where if necessary, we can go there. And then public safety, of course, was the primary touch point for the task force. But certainly if Task Force Chair McEwen thinks there's value to continuing it, I wouldn't anticipate that it's needed for an extended or prolonged period of time. But I would certainly defer to the chair.
Vice Chair
Chair.
McEwen?
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I agree with the administrator. I don't think there's going to be a need for any more task force meetings. The direction is already set. The bids are going to be going out. It would just be nice to let the members know how progress goes, but it doesn't have to be through a meeting. And after April, I will not be on the board. But like I said, I would like to still be involved in it as a citizen. But like I said, I don't believe that the task force is going to be needed for any more decisions. If something comes up now or all the funding or there's a problem with it, that would be the only thing, but I don't see that happening. So, but thank you.
Okay, so the way I'm understanding is we allow the morgue task force to sunset and be removed from the rules.
Correct.
Okay. Supervisor Robinson?
Under the broadband task force, we keep extending the sunsets, and I think there is probably a need for the next year to two, given the broadband access and our equity and deployment program coming down and working with the internet service providers and establishing that. So I would propose that we extend that for 2 years. We also have a current situation where we have 11 members versus the 9 that are laid out in the rules, and it has afforded both more representation on the county board, I think, reflecting the interests of the members. So you may want to change that to 6 members of the county board. change it to 11 members or
Total, correct.
to reflect where we're at right now.
Consensus? All right. Moving on to 49 and get to 50. Clarification was added to the Metallic Mining Committee. Oh, go ahead. Corp.
So just to give some clarity on that piece, the Metallic Mining Committee, when the county board created its metallic mining ordinance back in 2018, there was a metallic mining committee that was created as part of ordinance 6-18, but that was never added to the rules. So this language is directly from ordinance 6-18, establishing the membership terms, et cetera, of that subcommittee. So just to clarify, that's where I got the language from, and that's why it's in there.
Thoughts? Thumbs up. Moving on, 51, part of the Metallic Mining Committee, 52, part of the Metallic Mining Committee. 53, no changes. And my computer is being miserable. 54, no changes. 55, no changes. 56, no changes. 7, no changes. And we get to the end. We get to any further discussion on the rules as proposed? We get to the next page. Supervisor Baker, please.
I have a question. No, it's not on a red line, but something I don't think we're following or didn't follow. Back up on page 5. And it might just be my memory. It says, let me get back up there. So in terms of the chair's, on M, in terms of the chair's guidelines, was supposed to be reviewed by the executive committee, which I think we deferred to this committee, but then it says approved by the board in October that same year. And I don't believe that we did that. So I was just wondering if that,
It was, yeah, it was reviewed by the executive committee. I don't think it went to the full board for its approval.
so is that something we want to leave in the rules and do, or do we want to?
It's the recommendation of this committee. Thoughts? Supervisor Robinson?
I think we should leave it in and try to do it.
It would make sense that it could be approved by the board. I mean, it's the expectation with the board's expectation, not just the executive committee's expectation of what the chair should be doing. Supervisor Baker?
So should we try to do that between now and the end of the term, or do we want to have that discussion? Would that be worthwhile?
Yeah. Thoughts of the committee? Supervisor Robinson?
I think we've set the salary, but we could bring the objectives before the board. I think we've already done. We could argue when we passed the salaries for the supervisors, we did part of that. We just didn't do all of it. And the question is, so maybe direct the executive committee to review this and make a recommendation to the board relative to the duties of the chair to be going to the board. It would be a thought.
To the new board or the current board?
Current board. I defer to Mike.
You're deferring to me on a policy decision, so I'm going to defer to you on the policy.
Supervisor Baker and then Supervisor Longo.
So I would expect that this will probably be the subject of discussion at the organizational meeting. And it seems to me that it might be good to have a pre-discussion among the current board, just to like kind of bring up the issues and have on record, have some of the, because that organizational meeting always tends to be long. So if we have time, then maybe have that discussion ahead of time. I'm not dead set on that, but I'm more bringing up for our consideration discussion that whether that would be worthwhile or not. So
Supervisor Longhorn, please.
So I just want to confirm this discussion that of the guidelines and expectations that should have taken by exec, did exec defer that to us? No, we just took it up. Got it. So then, yeah, I would agree we'd have to follow this rule. We set it forth. Now, I think we're not going to meet the timing set forth in here, but I think we should still follow it to the best that we can.
Okay. Okay. Any other items as the proposed rules are written? Then we'll go back to the agenda. Further discussion on the standing committee's authority to elect their chair and vice chair. Item 5B. It was requested to be brought back for additional discussion. I think the consensus was initially from the rules review, majority of the rules review committee was that the appointments of the chair, from the chair, still be applied. It was suggested by several members of Rules Review that the election by the committee select the chair and the vice chair. And so it was asked to be brought back. I don't know. I think still the consensus, the majority of the Rules Review Committee still believe the same, but I would open it up for discussion. Supervisor Baker.
thank you. So I was actually not the one who introduced this initially, but then I asked Corp Counsel to draft it, and that's on page 64 of the packet, is the changes. One of the points that I want to make, and Corp Counsel can correct me but if I'm wrong, but I believe that the default condition under Robert's rules is for the committees to elect their own chairs and vice chairs. So this isn't something that's that far afield. It's actually the way that it would be done under Robert's rules if we didn't have rules otherwise. And I guess I view the board's organizational role a little differently than some others do. I view it as we should really be self-governed in that all the supervisors that are elected are more or less on equal basis and have equal input into leadership and agenda. And I think this would, potentially provide a better functioning board and provide more opportunity to supervisors in general. Thank you.
Other thoughts? Supervisor Hart, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of the things I don't see in this proposed rule is how to address this change with the executive committee. I talked to people at my job at City of Wausau because the City of Wausau does this for their committees. However, that has essentially made it so they can't have an executive committee because they have multiple people who are chairs of multiple committees, and that means that their executive committee, it creates a lot of problems. So in order for this rule to be enacted, it would have to address what we would do with our executive committee. It would also have to address what happens if someone becomes the chair of multiple committees, vice chair of multiple committees. how do committees decide that if they don't know what each other's committees are doing? I mean, there's a lot of things that need to be hashed out before this can be done. So that's one of the things that I don't know where I stand on this right now, but I do know that those issues need to be addressed before we can do this. Thank you.
One, I really struggle with because I talk to multiple counties and you know in various positions, whether I'm at WCA function or others, and various counties do it differently. Some do it as Supervisor Baker is potentially proposing, and others do it exactly the way Marathon County does it. I think the one thing that the proposal by Supervisor Baker here, and I know it wasn't originally proposed by him, but is it allows, or in some cases creates a potential popularity contest. I think one of the comments that I had heard from multiple various counties was the chair is trying to create a leadership team that's leading the county board, and it is not necessarily a popularity contest, but a leadership, and the board has elected the chair, the board's elected the vice chair, and so I know in some cases some people don't agree with the selection of the chairs and the vice chairs, but again, I think you're trying to create a leadership team that's going to lead the county board. So I'm not going to. But it's the will of this committee that whatever it wishes to do, it can make its recommendations. But I wouldn't be technically in favor of that suggestion. Any other discussion?
Chairman Gibbs,
Vice Chair McEwen, please.
thank you. I appreciate Supervisor Baker's reasoning for trying to change up the leadership. However, the last 6 years being involved in helping the chair choose just the standing committees, and then the subcommittees, and then the administrator has to appoint some committees, and then trying to, with the amount of turnover sometimes that the board has, it's very difficult not only to find the chairs for each committee and the vice chairs for each committee. You have to take into consideration a lot of people's businesses or jobs. They wouldn't have the ability to put the extra effort into being a chair or a vice chair. Or I know some supervisors that would have been excellent chairs or vice chairs, and I spoke to them and they didn't want that. So it really is the best. This is the best way to choose a leadership team that would work together. I don't expect everybody to be on the same page. However, it has to be something that works as a group. So I would not support trying to change up the way these chairs and vice chairs are picked by the chair, and that can change with the new chair or the existing chair. So it's not set in stone. So I would not be in favor of moving forward with changing this way of choosing the chairs and the vice chairs. Thank you.
Supervisor Becker, please.
Thank you. So, as I mentioned last month, I wasn't expecting this committee to approve this. As majority of the committee are chairs of a standing committee. So I did want to give people the opportunity to weigh in on it, and also to give people notice that this is something that may come before the organizational meeting, you know, not to be the first time that they heard about that. So I wanted, you know, I just have an opportunity to discuss it, to think about it, and, you know, consider ramifications. One point I would like to make is, compared to the city of Wausau, we have a much larger number of supervisors than the city has council or aldermen, and therefore we have very little overlap in terms of people that serve on multiple standing committees. So I know there are some, but the chances of a chair being elected by more than one committee in our system in structure would be much less than what it would be in the city of Wausau, I would say. Because there's maybe 2 or 3 people that are common between different committees, or maybe 5, I don't know what the number is, but thank you.
Others, Supervisor Longhorn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think that's a good assessment. This is a completely different organizational body compared to the city of Wausau. But as been said, you know, like Supervisor Seafeld, for example, serves on ERC and EEDC with Supervisor Unger. So like that would be one of the handful of examples that could come up. I'll save my other comments for the reorg meeting, but I just want to say something initially here. With us being a larger body compared to the city of Wausau, being 38 members, I think one of the things that we can all agree on is that being this sort of mini legislature that we are, we should try and eliminate as much chaos as possible. And I think if you start to go down this path of popularity contests, politics, potential open meetings law violations, depending on if people are campaigning or not, you're going to introduce more chaos into the system. I respect the idea of empowering all the members of the board. I wasn't always a standing committee chair. I wasn't always a member of the executive committee. Took years for me to get to where I am right now on this board. One of the best things that this board did was have the at-large member of the executive committee be added to their membership. Getting more engagement from the general members is a great idea. Like I said, I think that's a great idea that the board had all the way back then with adding that at-large member, and now we have 2 to make the numbers balance out. I think with adding that extra chaos in there, or at least the potential for chaos, I wouldn't support going down that road. I would still support the chair making those, at least the appointments, to be approved by the board, of course. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other discussions? Okay. So there's consensus from the committee that we have, the Rules Review Committee. The recommendation will be that it stay the same. I think we can consider the 45-day timeline for addressing agenda topic items. I think that's already been discussed and accepted by the Rules Review Committee to include that. And so is there anything else to be discussed by the Rules Review Committee before we present the recommendations to Executive Committee? Ma'am, please. Unless there's objection.
Chairman Gibbs.
I recognize a citizen member, please.
I just had 2 suggestions for rules that I would think what would fall under committee meeting topic. And one would be to take a verbal attendance of supervisors that are in the meeting, especially with the online presence. There's oftentimes that I'm watching a meeting and I don't even realize that there's other supervisors involved in the meeting until perhaps a vote is taken or something, you know, where they ask to speak. So being that there's not that many members on most subcommittees, I think that that would be an easy thing to make sure that citizens that are watching know who are the supervisors in attendance. And then the other thing that I would suggest is during meetings that there's speakers either from within the county that are addressing a topic that's on the agenda, so not typical committee meeting members that are coming in to speak on a topic, that they be introduced with their entire name and their actual title, either within Marathon County, or if they're coming in from outside, their title and the organization that they're with. There's oftentimes that people are introduced very casually because you all have relationships with them, but those of us watching don't. And I'll use an example from during the budget meetings this year. There was a gal that works for Marathon County. I don't recollect her name. But then when she was done talking about her topic, apparently her husband works here too. And she's like, I'll call my husband up here now. And I was like, well, who's your husband? What is his job in the county? And so I was trying to figure out like who was who in that. And so that's why I asked that people be formally introduced and with their title role and like what, why they're speaking that day. So those are my two suggestions for rules and meetings. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenham, please.
So we appreciate the input. Thank you. I think for the first part, is there potential for us to add a roll call for the beginning of each of the standing committee agendas or the subordinate body agendas? For the second point, our requirements for public comment are that they state their name.
Not
They-
public comment. People that are speaking
Yep.
on the agenda at committee meetings. Not public, yeah.
Could be staff.
Is-
or could be-
Is that something that, I don't know if that'd be appropriate for the rules to take up, but is it more appropriate for
Education of the chair.
something the chairs could do more as best practice, right? I didn't even think about that. The only thing I will say at my committee, because we do a lot of public hearings for rezones, one of the things that we do as part of convening the public hearing is we actually introduce the members of the Environmental Resources Committee, and we also note the staff that are present, although I may have neglected that in the last couple months because we've had some pretty lengthy hearings. That is something that at least my committee has at least done in the past, is something that now I'm going to continue to do. But those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I don't know that we need it, effectively, I think the chairs of each of the standing committees can do a much better job of introducing who is speaking and who is recognized to speak, and provide more clarity as to if it's a staff member and what their staff position is. I don't know that we need to have that as a rule, but I think, maybe a rule of a roll call, so that everybody that's watching or listening at least knows who's attending by WebEx and who's attending. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Chairman,
Supervisor Robinson?
Could we just put roll call in on the agendas? And I think that would deal with it. I will make the observation that there are routinely situations where we start the meeting and then we have people join after the start. And it's sometimes difficult to, if you do a roll call, it's a moment in time, and 2 minutes later, somebody else joins in. And I'm thinking from the HR Finance Committee, we have routinely a couple of people that are a little bit late, and they would not show up on the roll call. But what we'll try to do, and Kim watches that, and she'll tell me, and we can just announce that so-and-so has joined the meeting. So we'll try to do that. And I think yesterday we had that problem with the quorum on the broadband task force, where I think people were wondering, who's not there, and we didn't have a quorum, but there were a lot of people that were on, but people don't know necessarily who's a member and who's not. So we'll do. I think that would be good education for the chairs, and something we should bring up at the executive committee, just for reinforcing.
Yep. Vice Chair McEwen, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is a kind of an afterthought. As far as the Rules Review Committee, during the circumstances of these last 6 months, should the Rules Review Committee have a vice chair, in case a situation which occurred with myself happens?
I think we addressed that initially when we looked at all subcommittees will have a chair and vice chair moving forward. I think that was one of the changes that we've already made, Vice Chair McEwen. So all the subcommittees will have appointments of chairs and vice chairs,
Okay, thank you.
or
And I-
if so deemed, election of chairs and vice chairs.
Thank you. And I just want to thank the committee for the excellent job they did this term, and I apologize for being absent for all except for the last meeting. So thank you very much.
Okay, anything else? Supervisor Robinson?
I would make a motion that we forward our consent, our recommendations to the executive committee.
Motion is to forward the rules as revised recommendations to the executive committee for their review. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Seefeld. Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Corp Counsel, please.
Just to clarify, the changes that have been discussed today, I've been making in real time. Those would be included in those recommendations, but you haven't actually gotten to see what I wrote. If you're comfortable with that, that's fine. I can commit to you as in my role that I adopted the language that you suggested, but just wanted to make a note of that.
Mr. Chair, I would-
Supervisor Longon, please.
yeah, I would just request that Corp Counsel provide the drafts to all non-exec members of this group. And if they have any issues with it, they can come to the executive committee meeting, or they can send an email to the chair of exec, and he can communicate those concerns to the executive committee. So thank you.
Okay. Other thoughts? So the motion is to forward, including the changes that were made in real time by Corp Counsel today, to the executive committee for its consideration, and also to forward it to any non-exec committee members for their review and input. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. And that, I want to express my sincere thank you to each and every one of the committee members, and to the vice chair of the board, and thank all of you for your efforts and time and dedication to providing a set of rules, recommendations at least to the full board and to the exec committee for its consideration. And with that, this should be the last meeting of the Rules Review Committee. So we are down to item number 7. So we will not have a meeting on February 20th or 27th of February. And this would be the last rules. Supervisor Longenhan? Motion to adjourn. Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Hart. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion to adjourn signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. We stand adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.